My name is Sandra Martins, and I am 67 years old. At this age, you'd think a woman has already seen every way a heart could be broken. I thought I had. I had buried my husband, my partner of nearly 4 decades. I had endured the long nights of widowhood, the kind of silence that swallows a home whole. I had navigated the loneliness, the missed phone calls, the empty holidays. I thought I had faced the worst pain life could offer. But I was wrong. On July 4th, 2023, I discovered that heartbreak can take on a form so cruel and so unexpected that it leaves you gasping for breath, questioning everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and family. I stood on the front porch of my daughter's home, her perfect colonial house in the suburbs of Richmond, holding a homemade apple pie I had baked with care, with love, with history. The sounds of laughter and music floated from the backyard. I could see flashes of red, white, and blue decorations through the slats of the fence. Children's voices rang out, and the smell of barbecue drifted through the air. It should have been one of the happiest days of the year, a holiday tradition we had celebrated together for 5 summers straight. Instead, I stood there feeling like an intruder. My daughter, Jessica, opened the door, and in that moment, I didn't see the woman I had raised. I didn't see the little girl I had carried in my arms, the teenager I had driven to school dances, the woman whose hand I held when she walked down the aisle. I saw a stranger. Her smile disappeared when she saw me, and in its place came a look so cold it chilled me to the bone. "Mom," she said flatly. "What are you doing here? What am I doing here?" The question echoed inside my chest like a gunshot. I thought I had misunderstood. I thought maybe she was joking. Maybe this was a mix-up. After all, 3 weeks earlier she had texted me, "Mom, you're coming to the 4th barbecue, right? Same time as always. Can't wait to see you." That was an invitation, wasn't it? That was tradition, wasn't it? But as I stood there on her porch, clutching the pie that represented 50 years of family history, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. She pulled the door shut behind her, as if to make sure no one inside could hear what she was about to say. "This year's different, Mom," she whispered. "I didn't invite you. I invited Tyler's mother." I felt my knees weaken. Tyler's mother. Diane Fletcher. A woman who had never once treated me with kindness, a woman who had made me feel small, who had made it clear she thought I wasn't good enough for her son. She was inside laughing with my grandchildren while I stood outside in the blazing sun, unwelcome. Jessica's words cut deeper than any wound I had ever felt. "Mom, you're not welcome here. I only invited my mother-in-law." I don't remember how long I stood there, waiting for her to laugh, to take it back, to say she was kidding. But she didn't. She crossed her arms and stared at me as if I were a stranger who had shown up at the wrong house. And in that moment, I realized something devastating. My own daughter had chosen to replace me. That was the day my heart broke in a way I didn't know was possible. Not from death, not from loss, but from rejection by the one person I had loved more fiercely than anyone else in this world. It wasn't just that I was excluded from a party. It was the cruel message behind it. You don't matter. You are not needed. You are not wanted. That porch, on that sweltering July afternoon, was where the old version of me began to die, the Sandra who kept the peace, who swallowed her pain, who allowed herself to be discarded. And though I didn't yet know it, that porch was also where something new began to take shape inside me, a harder, stronger version of myself who was done being erased. 3 weeks before that devastating afternoon, everything felt different. When I first received the message from Jessica, my heart swelled with the kind of joy only a mother can understand. It was simple, almost casual. "Mom, you're coming to the 4th barbecue, right? Same time as always. Can't wait to see you." It wasn't flowery or sentimental, but I didn't need it to be. That one line carried tradition, continuity, and belonging. For 5 years, ever since Jessica and her husband, Tyler, had moved into their beautiful home, the 4th of July had been ours. It wasn't just a party, it was family, it was ritual, it was love stitched into food and fireworks. And in that moment, I had no reason to doubt it would be the same again. I wrote back immediately, my fingers tapping the words that felt as natural as breathing. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. Should I bring my famous apple pie?" Her response came quickly. Of course. See you at 2 p.m. I smiled so wide my cheeks ached. That pie wasn't just dessert. It was a family heirloom disguised as a recipe, passed down from my mother to me and shared with Jessica since she was old enough to stand on a stool in the kitchen, dusted with flour, helping me stir the filling. She had always told me it was her favorite. In my mind, that pie was the edible symbol of our bond. From that moment, preparations began. I bought a new blouse, a deep red one, festive but dignified, paired with navy slacks that made me feel confident. I wanted to look my best, not for anyone else, but for my family. I wanted to walk into Jessica's home and feel like I belonged there, like I still mattered in her world. Every detail mattered. I perfected the pie crust, adjusting the spices until the filling tasted exactly like my mother used to make. I even bought sparklers for Madison and Connor, my grandchildren, remembering how Jessica herself used to squeal with delight when we lit them in our backyard years ago. I imagined their little hands clutching them, the sparks flying, their laughter filling the night air. I was excited. Truly, deeply excited. The kind of excitement you only feel when you are preparing for something that makes you feel connected, seen, and loved. I told myself this holiday would help fill the void left by Paul's death 2 years earlier. My husband had always adored the 4th. He'd grill burgers in our small backyard, humming along to the radio while Jessica ran around in the grass with neighborhood kids. Since losing him, holidays had been harder. But Jessica's gatherings had been a balm, proof that family traditions lived on even when the people you loved most were gone. That's why I invested so much of myself into this one day. For 3 weeks, the thought of it carried me. When loneliness crept in during the evenings, I would picture myself at Jessica's table, sharing food, laughter, and stories. When grief for Paul hit me like a wave, I reminded myself that family was still there, still worth holding on to. So when July 4th finally arrived, I was ready. My pie sat perfectly golden in its carrier. A bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion sat on the seat beside me. My heart was light, full of anticipation. I had no idea I was driving toward rejection. No idea that the text message I had cherished was never an invitation at all. Looking back, the signs were there. Jessica's words had been casual, almost rushed. She never specifically said, "I want you there." She never wrote, "Mom, I can't wait to see you." She had asked if I was coming as though it were a given, or as though she were referring to something entirely different. But when you are a mother longing for connection, you don't dissect every word. You take love where you think it's offered, and you run with it. What I thought was an invitation turned out to be nothing but a cruel misunderstanding. Or worse, a deliberate choice disguised as ambiguity. And that was the sting that burned most when Jessica stood on her porch that afternoon, telling me I wasn't welcome. Because for 3 weeks, I had lived in a dream of belonging. I had carried hope like a fragile glass vase, polishing it, protecting it, believing it would hold. Only to find out she had never meant for me to hold it at all. The memory of that porch is seared into me like a scar I'll never fully forget. I can still feel the pie carrier in my trembling hands, still hear the laughter spilling from the backyard like a cruel soundtrack to the moment my world shifted. Jessica's eyes, my daughter's eyes, looked at me with an unfamiliar sharpness. No warmth. No softness. Just a cold finality. "Mom," she said again, her voice careful and low, "I didn't invite you this year. This was supposed to be a smaller gathering, more intimate." Her words didn't make sense. My mind scrambled, searching for a foothold. I had the text. I had the pie. I had 5 years of tradition behind me. I had love, my love, her mother's love. Surely that meant something. "Smaller?" I repeated, my voice quivering. Through the glass panel in the door behind her, I saw silhouettes moving. A burst of laughter rang out, unmistakably female. And then I recognized the voice. Diane Fletcher. My replacement. I looked at Jessica again, hoping, begging for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. "Jessica, you invited me. You said, same time as always. You told me to bring the pie." Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened further. "No, Mom. I didn't invite you. I was asking if you were going to your own gathering, not ours. You misunderstood. The words hit me like a slap. My body physically recoiled, pie shifting dangerously in my arms. Misunderstood? How could I misunderstand an invitation that had felt so clear? How could I misread the one thing I had been preparing for weeks to attend? You invited Tyler's mother instead? My voice cracked as I asked the question. Jessica exhaled sharply, as though I were being unreasonable. Diane's going through a divorce. She needs family support right now. Tyler wanted this to be special for her. And I don't need support? The words slipped out sharper than I intended. My voice felt foreign, breaking under the weight of betrayal. I lost my husband. I've been alone for 2 years. Do I not count? Her jaw tightened. Her arms crossed. Of course, you count. But Tyler's family comes first now. I'm sure you understand. No, I didn't understand. I couldn't. How does a daughter look at her own mother, the woman who carried her, raised her, sacrificed for her, and choose someone else? How does she dismiss a lifetime of love as if it were inconvenient, outdated, replaceable? I stared at her, waiting for her to break. Waiting for guilt to soften her tone, for her to reach out, to let me in. But she didn't. She just stood there, blocking the doorway with her arms folded across her chest. Mom, she said finally, her voice quieter, but no less firm. You're not welcome here today. I only invited my mother-in-law. I think it would be best if you left. The sentence cut through me with a cruelty I had never known from her. You're not welcome here. For 42 years, I had been her mother. I had been her safe place, her biggest supporter, her protector. And in one sentence, she discarded all of it as if it had no weight, no history, no meaning. I lifted the pie weakly, like some kind of offering. I made your favorite, I said, my voice sounding pathetic even to my own ears. Jessica glanced at it briefly, then back at me. I'm sure it's lovely. Maybe you can enjoy it at home. At home. Alone. I turned slowly, numbness spreading through me. Each step down the porch felt heavier than the last. Behind me, I heard the faint click of the door closing. By the time I reached the sidewalk, the sounds of the party had resumed as though nothing had happened. Laughter, clinking glasses, music. My absence hadn't caused so much as a ripple. I carried that pie for 3 long blocks back to my car, every step a humiliation. Neighbors waved from their yards, assuming I was heading to my own celebration. I waved back, my smile fixed in place, praying they wouldn't see the truth. When I slid into the driver's seat, the dam inside me cracked. I stared at the pie on the passenger seat, its golden crust flawless, its filling still warm. I had baked love into it. And it was sitting there, untouched, because the people it was meant for had decided I wasn't worth a seat at the table. It wasn't just a rejection of dessert. It was a rejection of me. I sat in that car for a long time, the air conditioning blasting against the sweltering July heat, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter, the center of my world, had told me I wasn't welcome in hers. And in that moment, I felt something inside me shift. The woman who always swallowed her pain, who smoothed over conflicts, who accepted scraps of affection, began to die on that porch. What replaced her wasn't fully formed yet, but a seed had been planted. A seed of anger. A seed of resolve. A seed of a woman who was done being discarded. When I finally pulled into my own driveway that afternoon, I felt as though I'd been emptied out. I don't even remember the drive home, just flashes of suburban streets lined with flags, the laughter of other families celebrating, and my hands clenched tight on the steering wheel as if I might fall apart if I let go. Walking into my house, the silence was deafening. It was the kind of silence that reminded me Paul was gone, that Jessica no longer wanted me, and that everything I had once believed about family could vanish with a single slammed door. I set the pie on the counter, still warm, still perfect, still unwanted. I stood staring at it for a long time, realizing that I had poured my love into something for people who wouldn't even let me through the door. And then my phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Mom, I hope you understand this wasn't personal. Maybe we can have lunch next week. Lunch next week. As if a plate of salads at some chain restaurant could erase the humiliation of being told I wasn't welcome at my own daughter's house. The old version of me, the woman I had been for decades, would have responded immediately. She would have said, "Of course, sweetheart. I understand. Thank you for reaching out." She would have swallowed the pain, smoothed things over, and let Jessica off the hook because keeping the peace mattered more than protecting her own dignity. But that woman had died on the porch. Instead, I turned my phone off. For the first time in my life, I allowed silence to be my answer. That night, I sat at my dining table with a slice of the pie and a cup of coffee. My fork scraped against the plate, the sound echoing in the stillness. I chewed slowly, staring at the walls of the house Paul and I had built together. I thought of the birthdays, the Christmas mornings, the homework sessions at the kitchen table. This house had been filled with love. Jessica had taken her first steps on its hardwood floors. She had grown up here. And yet, she looked at it now as if it were beneath her, just as she looked at me. I asked myself a question I hadn't dared to ask before. Why do I feel so disposable? The answer came slowly, painfully. Because I had allowed myself to be disposable. I had spent years putting everyone else's needs above my own. I had bent over backward to be easy, accommodating, undemanding. I thought that if I made myself small enough, convenient enough, no one would ever want to let me go. But in doing that, I had taught the people I loved most that my needs didn't matter. When had Jessica stopped calling me just to talk? When had she stopped asking for my advice? When had she started treating me like an obligation instead of a person she cherished? It hadn't happened all at once. It was a slow erosion, a drip of dismissals, each one small enough to overlook. Until they added up to this. Standing outside my daughter's door, pie in hand, being told I wasn't welcome. I thought about Diane, the glamorous mother-in-law who could buy expensive gifts, host elaborate dinners, and polish Jessica and Tyler's image. And then I thought about myself. A widow with a modest pension, a small house, and stories of the past that nobody seemed to want to hear anymore. No wonder Jessica had chosen Diane. She saw me as replaceable, because I had stopped showing her the parts of me that couldn't be replaced. But as painful as that realization was, it was also clarifying. I understood, sitting there in the dim light of my kitchen, that I had a choice. I could continue being the woman who accepted crumbs of affection, who smiled while being pushed aside, who pretended scraps were enough. Or I could become something else. And in that moment, grief began to transform into something sharper, awakening. I didn't know what that would look like yet. But I knew this much. I was done being erased. I was done being disposable. If my daughter no longer saw my worth, then I would find a way to build it myself. I pushed the half-eaten pie away and whispered aloud, to no one but myself, "Never again." Those words, soft and trembling, were the first promise of a new life. In the days that followed, I did something Jessica never expected. I didn't answer. Not her calls, not her texts, not even Tyler's attempts to smooth things over. The old Sandra would have rushed to repair the rift, desperate to be included again. But the woman born on that porch stayed silent. At first, the quiet felt strange, almost unnatural. Then, it began to feel powerful. I went about my days differently. I took myself out to lunch at my favorite little restaurant, ordering whatever I wanted without glancing at the price. I bought new sheets, luxurious Egyptian cotton ones I had always admired but never let myself purchase. I even called an old friend, Carol, someone I hadn't seen in months, and made plans for coffee. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting around for Jessica to fit me into her life. I was making choices for me. But the biggest choice came when I picked up the phone and made an appointment with James Morrison, my lawyer. James had handled Paul's will and our estate planning, and he had always been kind, steady, and professional. When I walked into his office the following morning, James greeted me warmly. "Sandra," he said, standing to shake my hand. "It's been a while. How are you holding up?" I smiled faintly. "Better than you might think, James. But I need to make some changes." "Changes?" His brow furrowed. "What kind of changes?" I took a deep breath. "I need to know exactly what I have. And I need to know my options for leaving it to someone other than Jessica. His expression shifted to seriousness. That's a significant decision. Has something happened? You could say that, I replied. And then, for the first time, I told him the whole story of July 4th. Of the text that wasn't an invitation. Of the pie that was never eaten. Of my daughter standing on her porch, telling me I wasn't welcome. When I finished, James leaned back in his chair, his face heavy with sympathy. Sandra, I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating. It was, I admitted. But more than that, it was enlightening. And now, I need to make sure that my legacy doesn't go to someone who doesn't value me. We spent the next hour combing through every detail of my finances. Between Paul's life insurance, his pension, my own retirement savings, and the value of my house, which had appreciated far more than I realized, I was worth just over $1.2 million. The number stunned me. For years, I'd thought of myself as modest, ordinary, living in a simple 2-bedroom ranch house. But the truth was, I had built something meaningful, something substantial. Something that could change lives. Does Jessica know about this? James asked carefully. She knows there's an inheritance, I said. But she thinks it's just the house and maybe a small savings account. She has no idea of the actual value. And right now, everything goes to her? Yes, I said firmly. Everything. But I want that to change. I want to leave my money to people and causes that will matter. Not to someone who treated me like I was disposable. James nodded slowly. Do you have something specific in mind? I did. The idea had been forming ever since that lonely night at my dining table. I want to start a foundation, I told him. Something that will help women like me, women who've been discarded by their families, made to feel like they don't matter. I want to take the pain I've lived and turn it into something that will make other women feel seen. James' eyes softened. That's extraordinary, Sandra. I shook my head. It's necessary. I've spent too many years bending myself into someone easy to discard. I won't let my life end that way. If Jessica doesn't value me while I'm alive, she doesn't get to benefit when I'm gone. We worked out the plan. A new will, a charitable foundation, a token sum of $10,000 for Jessica, just enough that she couldn't contest it. The rest would go to building something lasting, something bigger than me. As I signed the preliminary paperwork, I felt something stir inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't powerless. I wasn't the mother standing on a porch, begging for inclusion. I was the woman taking control of her future. I walked out of that office taller, lighter, stronger. Jessica had tried to erase me from her life. Instead, she had pushed me into becoming someone she could never erase again. 2 weeks passed before Jessica finally managed to corner me. I had been careful, answering just enough of her text to prove I was alive, but never enough to ease her guilt. The silence was driving her mad, and for the first time in years, I realized I liked that she felt the discomfort instead of me. It happened on a Thursday morning at the grocery store. I was standing in the coffee aisle, comparing prices, when I heard a voice behind me, sharp with urgency. Mom! I turned slowly, already knowing it was her. Jessica stood there in her tailored dress and designer handbag, every inch the polished suburban professional. But beneath the perfect makeup, I saw it, the shadows under her eyes, the tightness in her jaw. She hadn't been sleeping. My silence was working. Mom, what the hell is going on? She demanded, her voice louder than it needed to be. Other shoppers glanced over. I looked at her calmly, then turned back to the rows of coffee beans. Hello, Jessica. How are you? She blinked, caught off guard by my composure. How am I? I've been worried sick about you. You don't answer my calls, you ignore my texts, you've disappeared. What's wrong with you? I placed a bag of medium roast in my cart with deliberate care. Nothing's wrong with me. I've just been busy. Her laugh was bitter. Busy? You're retired, Mom. The dismissive way she said it, like my life held no value, like my days were empty and meaningless, ignited something in me. I straightened, turning to face her fully. I've been busy starting a foundation. She frowned. A what? A foundation. The Forgotten Mothers Foundation. It will provide support and resources for elderly women who've been abandoned or neglected by their families. Her mouth opened, then closed again like a fish gasping for air. That's nice, I guess. But what does that have to do with you ignoring your family? My voice grew steady, stronger with each word. Tell me, Jessica, when was the last time you called me just to talk? Not to ask for babysitting. Not to tell me about some schedule change. Just to talk to your mother? She shifted uncomfortably. We talk all the time. When was the last time you invited me to something without me having to ask? When was the last time you made me part of a family decision or asked my opinion on something that mattered? Her lips pressed into a thin line. This is about the 4th of July thing, isn't it? I told you that wasn't personal. Diane needed support, and I didn't? My voice rose before I could stop it, drawing more stares from shoppers around us. I've been a widow for 2 years. I live alone. Do you think I don't need support? Or is it just easier for you to give it to someone else instead? Jessica's face flushed deep red. You're being dramatic. It was one party. I shook my head. No, Jessica. It wasn't one party. It was the culmination of years of being pushed aside, dismissed, made to feel like I was nothing more than an obligation. That day wasn't an isolated mistake. It was the proof I needed to finally see the truth. She reached out and grabbed my arm, her voice softer now. Mom, please. Can we just go somewhere and talk? Really talk? For a moment, I looked at her hand on my sleeve, remembering the little girl who used to hold my arm tightly when crossing the street, the child who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. For a heartbeat, I felt the pull of old love. But then the image of her on that porch returned. Arms folded, eyes cold, telling me I wasn't welcome. I pulled my arm free. I don't think there's anything to talk about. You made your choice very clear. Her voice cracked. But I love you. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. Do you? Or do you love the idea of me? The convenient mother who brings pies, babysits the kids, shows up when invited, and never complains when she's excluded? Because that's not love, Jessica. That's utility. And I'm done being useful without being valued. She stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing with no words coming out. Around us, the grocery store carried on, carts rattling, cash registers chiming, but for me, the world had gone quiet. For the first time in my life, I had said everything I needed to say. And I walked away, leaving her standing in the aisle, staring after me as if she had never really seen me before. After that encounter in the grocery store, something shifted permanently inside me. I had spoken the truth out loud, not just to myself in the silence of my kitchen, but to Jessica directly. And once you speak the truth, you can't go back to swallowing it. You can't unsee what has been revealed. For the first time in years, I woke up each morning with purpose. It started small, scribbled notes on scraps of paper, ideas I jotted down at the dining room table where Paul and I used to share meals. But within days, those scraps of paper began to form into something bigger, something with shape and direction. The Forgotten Mother's Foundation. The name came to me one night when I couldn't sleep. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Jessica's words, "You're not welcome here." I only invited my mother-in-law. And it struck me I wasn't the only one who had heard some version of that sentence. There were thousands of women like me, quietly erased from the center of their families, left to sit on porches or in kitchens with pies, gifts, and love that nobody wanted anymore. Forgotten, not because we stopped loving, but because the people we loved decided we were replaceable. That realization lit a fire in me. If Jessica had discarded me, then I would take that pain and make sure other women didn't feel so alone. I would build something larger than myself, something that proved we mattered. The first step was research. I spent hours online reading about elder estrangement, abandonment, and neglect. What I found was staggering. Countless stories from women who had been pushed aside by their children once they became inconvenient. Women who were told they were too needy, too demanding, too much. Women who had given their entire lives to raising children and supporting families, only to be told in old age that their presence no longer fit into the picture. I wasn't an isolated case. I was part of a silent epidemic. The more I read, the more determined I became. I created a list of services the foundation would offer. Emergency financial assistance for women suddenly cut off by family. Counseling and peer support groups to help with the crushing emotional toll of abandonment. Legal aid for those facing elder abuse or unfair exclusion from family estates. Community events to build new networks of support, so women didn't have to feel invisible or alone. As the ideas poured out, so did my energy. For the first time since Paul's death, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. I called James Morrison, my lawyer, again. I'm serious about the foundation, I told him. I don't just want to redirect my inheritance. I want to create something that will outlive me. James helped me file the paperwork to establish the nonprofit, and he connected me with an accountant who specialized in charitable organizations. Within weeks, the Forgotten Mothers Foundation was more than an idea. It was real. But the most powerful part wasn't the legal documents or the financial accounts, it was the people. As soon as word began to spread, women started reaching out. They wrote letters, sent emails, left messages on the temporary phone line I had set up. One letter in particular stayed with me. It was from a woman named Dorothy, 72 years old. Her children had cut her off after she remarried, disapproving of her new husband. For 2 years, she had lived in isolation, convinced she was alone in her pain. I thought I was the only one, she wrote. I thought there must be something wrong with me. But knowing your foundation exists makes me feel seen for the first time in years. I cried when I read that letter. Not because it made me sad, but because it proved I was right. This wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. Each message reminded me that pain could be transformed into purpose. That even if my daughter didn't value me, I could create something that gave value to hundreds of women like me. At night, I would sit in my garden with a notebook, sketching out plans while the flowers Paul and I had planted years ago swayed gently in the evening breeze. For so long, I had felt like my life was ending. Now, it felt like something entirely new was beginning. Jessica thought she had erased me. Instead, she had given me the greatest gift of all. The clarity to see my worth and the courage to build a legacy from it. The Forgotten Mothers Foundation wasn't just about healing my wounds. It was about making sure no woman like me ever had to sit on a porch with a pie, waiting for love that never came. Jessica thought she had silenced me. For weeks after our confrontation in the grocery store, she kept calling, kept texting, but I remained measured and distant. A short reply here, a vague message there, just enough to remind her that I was alive, but not enough to give her the comfort she craved. I knew it was driving her crazy. The daughter who once dismissed me without hesitation was now rattled by my silence. Then came the news that she was planning a large birthday celebration at her house. The same house where, just weeks earlier, she had told me I wasn't welcome. The thought of being erased yet again, this time in front of her friends and Tyler's business associates, burned inside me like a slow fire. At first, I thought about ignoring it. Let her have her perfect suburban gathering without me. But then another thought struck me. What if, instead of being erased, I showed up on my own terms? Not as the discarded mother begging for scraps of attention, but as Sandra Martins, founder of the Forgotten Mothers Foundation. If Jessica wanted to curate her image, then I would remind her and everyone else that I was not invisible. I spent the week preparing, not with desperation, but with strategy. I bought a new dress, elegant but understated, something that made me look confident, not flashy. I had my hair done professionally for the first time in months. And most importantly, I ordered a stack of business cards and printed flyers about the foundation. If I was going to attend, I wasn't coming empty-handed. On the night of the party, I parked down the street, just as I had on the 4th of July. But this time, there was no pie on the passenger seat. Instead, there was a folder of materials about my foundation, waiting to be handed out. My heart was steady. My purpose was clear. I walked up to the house, rang the bell, and waited. Tyler answered the door, and his face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions, shock, panic, and finally something close to relief. "Sandra," he said. "You came." "Of course," I said evenly. I wouldn't miss my daughter's birthday. I followed him inside. The house was filled with people, the kind of polished crowd Jessica thrived on: neighbors, colleagues, Tyler's business contacts. Conversations buzzed, glasses clinked, and laughter echoed from the backyard. But when I stepped onto the patio, I felt the shift. Eyes turned. Conversations slowed. People glanced between Jessica and me, curiosity flickering in their expressions. Jessica was near the bar, glowing in a red cocktail dress, surrounded by friends. When she saw me, her smile faltered. For a moment, her face went white. She hadn't expected me. She hadn't prepared for this. I walked directly to her, my step steady. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, hugging her briefly. To anyone watching, it must have looked affectionate, but to Jessica, I'm sure it felt as stiff and calculated as it was. She forced a smile. "Mom, I didn't know you were coming." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied smoothly. Her friends turned to me with polite curiosity. "So nice to meet you," one woman gushed. "Jessica talks about you all the time." "Does she?" I asked, tilting my head. "That's interesting." Another woman chimed in. "She said you've been busy with some kind of charity work?" "Yes," I said with a calm smile. "I founded the Forgotten Mothers Foundation. We support elderly women who've been abandoned or excluded by their families. It's more common than people realize. Daughters, sons, in-laws, sometimes they decide their parents are inconvenient and simply push them aside. Our foundation helps those women rebuild their lives." The group fell silent. I didn't need to say more. The implication hung in the air like smoke, and I could see Jessica's friends beginning to connect the dots. Jessica jumped in quickly. "Ladies, why don't I show you the kitchen renovations we just finished?" But I wasn't finished. Throughout the night, I worked the room like a seasoned advocate. I introduced myself to Tyler's colleagues, explained the mission of the foundation, handed out business cards, and shared stories of women who had been cast aside by their families. Every conversation planted a seed. Every interaction chipped away at Jessica's carefully curated image of the devoted daughter. Then Diane Fletcher arrived. She swept toward me with her usual air of superiority, glass of wine in hand. "Sandra," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What a surprise to see you here." "Diane," I replied evenly. "You look well. How are you adjusting to single life?" "Oh, wonderfully," she said, preening. "Jessica and Tyler have been so supportive. They've really taken me under their wing." "How nice," I said. "It must be comforting to know you're valued in this family." Her smile faltered. She heard the subtext, even if she didn't acknowledge it. I let her sit with the discomfort before adding, "I was just telling Jessica's friends about my new foundation. We support women who've been excluded by their children, abandoned, really. It happens more often than people think." Diane's wine glass stilled halfway to her lips. "How heartbreaking," she said carefully. "Yes," I said. "Heartbreaking. But also preventable if families choose loyalty over convenience." I left her standing there, unsettled, as I moved on to another group. By the end of the night, several guests had asked me for more information about the foundation. Some even offered to connect me with potential donors. My work was done. As I prepared to leave, Jessica cornered me by the front door. Her eyes burned with anger and desperation. "What the hell was that?" she hissed. "I was socializing at my daughter's birthday party," I said calmly. "Isn't that what you wanted?" "You made me look like a monster," she snapped. I tilted my head. "Did I? Or did your own actions do that?" "I just told the truth." Her face crumpled. "Have you gotten your revenge? Are you satisfied now?" "This isn't about revenge, Jessica," I said quietly. "It's about truth. And if the truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why." I left her standing in her own doorway, surrounded by the remnants of a party she could no longer control. For the first time in years, I felt lighter walking out of her house than I had walking in. She had tried to erase me. But that night, I reminded her and everyone else that I was still here. The morning after Jessica's birthday party, my phone began buzzing before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. Calls, texts, Notifications. Not from Jessica, though, this time from her friends. Sarah Henderson, one of her closest colleagues, was the first. "Sandra," she said when I finally picked up, "I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the foundation card you gave me. I just wanted to say how inspiring your work is. I had no idea this was happening to so many women." Her voice was warm, kind. But beneath it, I could sense something else. Confusion. Because the story Jessica had told her friends, the devoted daughter narrative, the picture-perfect family, didn't quite match the truth I had revealed at her party. And Sarah wasn't the only one. Margaret, one of Tyler's associates, sent me an email asking whether I'd be open to speaking at a local women's leadership luncheon about the hidden epidemic of elder abandonment. Even Diane called, though that conversation was short, sharp, and dripping with barely disguised panic. The truth was spreading. And with every person who reached out, Jessica's carefully constructed image was cracking. I didn't have to say a single bad word about her. I didn't have to accuse her or shout her betrayal from the rooftops. All I did was tell my story and let people put the pieces together themselves. And they did. Jessica called me 3 times that day, her messages ranging from angry to desperate. "Mom, you embarrassed me in front of everyone. People are asking questions. Do you know what you've done?" Yes, I thought. I know exactly what I've done. I've shifted the balance of power. Because for years, Jessica held all the power in our relationship. She decided when to include me, when to discard me, when to extend an invitation, or when to close the door in my face. And I accepted it, thinking that was what mothers did, waiting patiently for their children to give them crumbs of affection. But no more. Now, she was the one scrambling, while I sat back and watched her squirm under the weight of her own choices. The social fallout was swift. At school, Madison and Connor's teachers asked why their grandmother was suddenly the face of a nonprofit for abandoned mothers. At Tyler's company, whispers began about his wife's coldness, about what kind of daughter could inspire such an organization. Even Jessica's closest friends looked at her differently, because it's one thing to hear a woman complain about family tension. It's another to hear her mother calmly explain, in front of witnesses, that she had been discarded. And Jessica hated it. She texted me one night at 11 p.m. "Why are you doing this to me? Don't you care how this makes me look?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "I'm not doing anything to you, Jessica. I'm telling the truth. If the truth makes you look bad, perhaps you should change your actions, not ask me to hide them." She didn't reply. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, she had dismissed me as if my feelings didn't matter. Now suddenly, she cared very much about my words, because they were being heard by people who mattered to her. And that was the difference. She wasn't panicked because she had hurt me. She was panicked because her image was suffering. I let her sit in that discomfort. I let her feel the consequences of choices she had made so casually, so carelessly. Because sometimes the only way people learn is when their actions cost them something they value. For Jessica, that something was reputation. Meanwhile, the foundation grew stronger every day. With each awkward question Jessica had to answer, more women reached out to me, telling me their stories. Women who had been excluded from weddings, ignored at holidays, treated as burdens instead of blessings. Women who thought they were alone until they saw me standing tall, refusing to be erased. And that, I realized, was the greatest power of all. Not revenge, not humiliation, but truth. The kind of truth that ripples outward, forcing people to see what they'd rather ignore. Jessica had tried to silence me, but instead, she had amplified me. Her rejection had planted the seed of a foundation that was now taking root in the community. And with every story shared, every connection made, her grip on the narrative weakened. I didn't need to destroy her. She was doing that herself, one panicked text at a time. All I had to do was keep telling the truth. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It was slow at first, a crack in her polished facade here, a whispered comment there. But cracks have a way of spreading, and soon Jessica's mask was crumbling faster than she could patch it. By late autumn, the whispers had become open questions. Friends who once flocked to her dinner parties started declining invitations. Tyler's colleagues looked at her with thinly veiled curiosity, their conversations peppered with subtle references to the forgotten mother's foundation. Even the PTA mothers, her fortress of social validation, began to ask about me in hushed tones while Jessica forced tight smiles and evasive answers. One Saturday morning, she showed up at my doorstep. No warning, no text. Just Jessica standing there in yoga pants and a messy bun, her eyes red and swollen. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. Not because her appearance had changed, but because I had never seen my daughter stripped of her armor before. No designer clothes. No perfect smile. Just a woman on the verge of collapse. "Mom," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please, can I come in?" I hesitated, my hand resting on the doorknob. Images flooded my mind, her porch, her cold eyes, the way she had told me I wasn't welcome. A part of me wanted to close the door, to give her a taste of her own cruelty. But another part, the part that still ached with maternal instinct, stepped aside and let her in. She sank onto my couch as if her bones couldn't hold her up any longer. For a long moment, we sat in silence. I studied her face, waiting. Finally, she spoke. "I can't do this anymore." I tilted my head. "Do what?" "Pretend." Her voice cracked. "Pretend that everything is fine. Pretend that I didn't hurt you. Pretend that I haven't been selfish." Her words tumbled out, raw and unpolished. "Everyone keeps asking about you. About the foundation. About why you would even start something like that. I've tried to spin it, to explain it away, but I can't. Because deep down, I know the truth. You started it because of me. Because of what I did to you." Tears streamed down her face, and she buried her face in her hands. For the first time since Paul's funeral, my daughter wasn't the composed, ambitious woman she projected to the world. She was a broken child again, undone by her own choices. "I was cruel," she admitted through subs. "I thought Diane was better for my image. She had money, connections, a way of making things look perfect. And I thought you didn't fit anymore. You were just mom. Always there, always dependable, always small enough for me to take for granted. I told myself you'd understand. I told myself it was just one party. But it wasn't. It was me telling you that you didn't matter. And I hate myself for it." Her confession sat heavy between us. I felt a swirl of emotions, anger, sorrow, vindication, but also an aching tenderness I had tried so hard to suppress. "You broke my heart, Jessica," I said softly. "More than anyone else ever could. Because I expected cruelty from strangers. But not from my own daughter." She nodded vigorously, tears dripping onto her lap. "I know. And I can't take it back. But I want to make it right. I don't know how, but I'll do anything." I studied her carefully. Was this remorse, or just regret at being caught? The cynic in me whispered it was the latter. But another part of me, the mother who still loved her, who always would, saw something genuine in her trembling hands and desperate eyes. "What do you want from me, Jessica?" I asked. She lifted her head. "I want to help. With the foundation. I want to be involved. I want to show you that I'm not that person anymore." The words stunned me. Jessica, who once saw me as an inconvenience, who once replaced me with Diane, was asking to stand beside me in the very project born from her betrayal. I folded my hands in my lap, weighing her words. "Helping with the foundation isn't about repairing your image, Jessica. It's about serving women who have lived the pain you gave me. If you come into this, it can't be for show. It has to be real." She nodded eagerly. "I know. I understand. Please, give me a chance." For the first time in months, I let myself hope. Maybe this was her breaking point. Maybe this was the crack that would finally let the light in. But I also knew better than to rush. Trust, once shattered, doesn't mend in a single conversation. It takes time, consistency, humility. I looked at my daughter, broken and trembling on my couch, and said the only thing I could. "We'll see." Jessica began showing up the following week. At first, it was small things, helping me sort through donation letters, carrying boxes of flyers to the community center, driving me to meetings when I was tired. She was eager, almost too eager, as if she thought 1 week of effort could erase years of neglect. I watched her carefully. I didn't push her away, but I didn't let her too close either. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. It's tested, measured, proven slowly, and I needed to see if she was here because her conscience had woken up or because her reputation demanded it. The first true test came at a support group meeting we held at the library. About 15 women sat in a circle, sharing stories of estrangement. Some spoke through tears, others with bitter laughter. Jessica sat beside me, quiet at first, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Then one woman, Dorothy, the same woman whose letter had touched me weeks earlier, looked directly at Jessica. "And what about you? You're her daughter, aren't you? Do you know what it feels like to be forgotten?" The question hung in the air. Jessica's face flushed, and for a moment I thought she would lie, dodge, or excuse herself. But then she did something I hadn't expected. She told the truth. "No," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know what it feels like to be forgotten. But I know what it feels like to be the one who does the forgetting." I pushed my mother aside. I thought she'd always be there no matter how I treated her. And I was wrong. I hurt her. And I don't know if she'll ever forgive me, but I want to try. The room went silent. Then Dorothy nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then maybe you'll understand better than most why this matters." I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't a performance, at least. It didn't feel like one. Jessica's words carried a rawness I hadn't heard in years. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to see. In the weeks that followed, she threw herself into the foundation's work. She helped organize a fundraiser bake sale, typed up donor thank you notes, even sat in on counseling sessions to listen to stories that mirrored mine. Sometimes I would catch her wiping her eyes quietly, overwhelmed by the pain she was finally allowing herself to see. But even as she showed up, I kept my guard. Because remorse and regret are cousins, not twins. Regret often grows from shame, about being caught, about appearances, about consequences. Remorse, on the other hand, grows from empathy. And I needed to know which one lived inside my daughter. One afternoon, as we packed care boxes for elderly women in assisted living, I asked her directly, "Jessica, why are you really here?" She froze, the packing tape in her hand suspended midair. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," I said. "Is this about repairing your image? Or is it about repairing us?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Both," she admitted. At first, it was about me. About the whispers, the questions, the looks I was getting everywhere I went. I hated it. I hated that people thought I was a bad daughter. But the more time I spend here, the more I realize. Maybe I was a bad daughter. Not just because of the foundation, but because of how I treated you long before this. Her voice cracked. I stopped seeing you as a person. I saw you as a background character in my life, someone who would always be there, waiting, no matter how badly I treated you. And I don't want to be that person anymore. I studied her, searching for the hollow notes of performance, but I didn't hear them. For once, her words felt real, unpolished, unpracticed. "You can't undo the past," I said quietly. "I know," she whispered. "But maybe I can change the future." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. Slowly, the community began to notice the change too. People who had once whispered about Jessica's coldness now spoke about her effort. They saw her at fundraisers, heard her speak at events, watched her roll up her sleeves instead of hiding behind a perfect image. And while some were skeptical, others began to believe she was trying. And so did I. Not fully. Not without reservation. But enough to let a sliver of hope back into my heart. Because redemption isn't a single act, it's a pattern. And though I still guarded my trust like a fragile flame, I began to see Jessica's actions as kindling, small sparks that might one day reignite what we had lost. For now, that was enough. The night of the gala felt like the culmination of everything. the pain, the betrayal, the awakening, and the rebirth. For months, the Forgotten Mother's foundation had been growing quietly, brick by brick, heart by heart. We had raised enough to fund emergency housing for 3 women, partnered with a local legal aid clinic, and created a hotline staffed by volunteers who understood the ache of being discarded. Now, the gala was our chance to make the foundation undeniable. The ballroom shimmered with soft golden light, tables adorned with white linen and centerpieces of roses. Donors in evening wear mingled with women whose stories mirrored mine, proof that the cause was real, urgent, human. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt radiant. I wore a dark green gown Paul had once loved, the fabric flowing around me like strength itself. Around my neck was a necklace I had kept hidden for decades, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant he had given me on our 25th anniversary. I had put it away after his death, unable to wear it without breaking down. But tonight, it didn't feel like grief. Tonight, it felt like carrying him with me as I stepped fully into who I had become. Jessica arrived late, as she often did, but this time she wasn't sweeping in to take center stage. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but subdued, her hair pulled back. And for the first time since she was a teenager, she didn't look like she was trying to outshine the room. She looked like she belonged to it. As the evening unfolded, I moved from table to table, shaking hands, thanking donors, listening to women share how much the foundation meant to them. Jessica trailed me quietly, offering small smiles, carrying folders, making introductions when needed. She didn't push herself forward. She didn't try to reclaim the spotlight. She stood beside me, not in front of me. When it was time for me to give my speech, I walked to the podium with steady steps. The room quieted, hundreds of eyes on me. I took a breath. My name is Sandra Martins. I am 67 years old. And last year, I stood on my daughter's porch with a pie in my hands and was told I wasn't welcome. A hush fell across the room. Even those who had already heard fragments of my story leaned in. I thought my life was over that day. I thought my worth had vanished. But instead, something else was born. The woman who walked away from that porch was not the same woman who had stepped onto it. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer disposable. And she decided she would never again let anyone make her feel that way. I spoke of the women who had reached out, of the countless stories of abandonment and neglect. I spoke of resilience, of pain turned into purpose, of love rediscovered in community when blood ties failed. By the time I finished, the room was on its feet. Applause thundered, loud enough to shake the walls. Tears glistened in more eyes than I could count. As I stepped down from the stage, Jessica was waiting. She wrapped her arms around me, holding me tightly, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but for me. For the first time in years, her embrace felt like it meant something. Later that evening, when the speeches were over and the music began, Jessica found me sitting at our table, fiddling with my necklace. She sat down beside me, her eyes glistening. "That's beautiful," she whispered, nodding to the pendant. "Your father gave it to me," I said softly. I kept it hidden for years after he died. Tonight felt like the right time to wear it again. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small box. I was going to wait, but I think you should have this now. Inside was a necklace, silver, simple, elegant. The pendant was shaped like a small circle, engraved with 2 words, "Forgive me." Tears pricked my eyes. "Jessica." She shook her head quickly. "I don't deserve forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I wanted you to know that I see what I did. I see you. And I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were. I just want a chance to be in your life as the daughter you deserve, not the one you had." I closed the box gently. My heart ached, torn between wounds that still throbbed and hope that dared to rise. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a gift you gave once. It was a choice you made again and again, a bridge you built slowly, plank by plank. Forgiveness, I said quietly, isn't about erasing what happened. It's about deciding that the past doesn't get to chain us forever. I don't know if I can give it fully yet, but I'm willing to try. Her hand trembled as she reached for mine. That's all I ask. The music swelled in the background, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future where Jessica and I weren't strangers, where love wasn't smothered by pride or shame. A future where pain had forged something stronger between us. The necklace Paul had given me rested against my skin, warm and steady. The new necklace, Jessica's plea, her acknowledgement, her attempt, sat in its box, waiting. Together, they told the story of a woman broken, remade, and finally seen. As the night drew to a close, I stood tall, my foundation launched, my voice heard, my worth undeniable. Jessica had broken me. But in doing so, she had also given me the chance to become someone stronger than I ever imagined. And as I left the gala, hand in hand with my daughter, I knew this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one.